So, welcome back to the series where I bring to you the best and worst recordings of operas. Today, we're going to go over the discography of Richard Strauss's masterpiece Elektra. As some of you might know, well, this is my favorite opera, personally, and I believe that it's one of the best operas ever written. The sheer amount of excitement and dramaticism in this opera is unequaled. For those of you who don't know too much about this opera, the plot of it is basically Electra and Chrysothermis are two sisters. They're the daughters of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon. However, Clytemnestra, along with her actual lover, Aegisth, kills their father, which is Agamemnon. Electra swears revenge on her mother to kill her to revenge her father, and her sister Chrysothermis tries to stop her from doing so, but eventually fails because the brother of Electra and Chrysothermis, Orestes, who was believed to be dead after some propaganda stuff, turns out to be not dead and comes back to the household to kill Electra's mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aegisth. Looking at the premiere cast from 1909, the title role was sung by the soprano Annie Krul, who did record a number of excerpts from, her repertoire, Wagnerian stuff. Chrysothermis was sung by Margarethe Siems, who was actually a coloratura soprano, and there are recordings of her doing stuff like Lucia, doing Lakme and stuff like that. But of course, he also recorded stuff from Aida, Rosenkavalier, and some, more dramatic roles like that. A very versatile soprano. Clytemnestra was sung by the world-famous mezzo-soprano Ernestine Schumann-Heink. Shouldn't be too unfamiliar with her. And the rest of the cast did not record much. But Aegisth from the premiere was the tenor Johann Sembach, who did record some Wagner excerpts as well. The title role of Electra is an infamously difficult role to sing because for the entirety of the opera, some 1 hour 30 minutes, she never leaves the stage. From the start to end, she keeps singing. So obviously, it's very difficult. So the amount of quality Electras that we have on discography is not that much, but we'll still take a look at it today. However, let us first take a look at the checkpoints, which are some excerpts for each character that you should listen before determining whether it's a good reading of the role or not, therefore determining whether or not this is a good recording of the opera. Firstly, let's talk about the title role of Electra. I've chosen 5 checkpoints here actually because of the expansiveness of the entire role. First one are a few lines from her opening monologue, a line wie ganz allein. The first lines from this monologue that I've chosen goes Agamemnon, Agamemnon, wo bist du, Vater? The lyrics in English go like this. Agamemnon, Agamemnon, where are you, father? Don't you have the strength to drag your face to me? So obviously, this is Electra mourning her dead father in his grave, and she's in a very depressed mood, obviously, mourning the loss of her father as she does every day, apparently. So obviously, for this line, the soprano has to have a very dark and gloomy voice to deliver this line, so that's why I've chosen it. The other line from our first checkpoint, the monologue, it starts Agamemnon Vater, and it ends Dein Tag wird kommen. So the English translation of the lyrics for this entire, excerpt is basically Agamemnon, father, I want to see you. Don't leave me today. still like yesterday, there like a shadow in the corner of the wall. Show yourself to your daughter. And then, Father, Agamemnon, your day will come. Musically, you have to hear the soprano, change the mood while delivering these few lines. It starts, Father, I want to see you. Don't leave me today. So it's still a sorrow-like quality. You still need to hear her sorrow, and then after, she sings, come to me, show yourself today." Uh, the love motif in the opera plays. After that, uh, the change of mood has to become a very determined one, and sings, "Father, Agamemnon, your day will come." So you need to hear the determination. So the soprano has to have, control over the coloring of her voice so as to show the change of tone from the sorrow mourning tone in the first few lines to the determination in the last one. Our second checkpoint for the title role comes in her aria, sort of, at the end of her scene with Clytemnestra. The aria starts "Was bluten muss," and the lines I've chosen here for the checkpoint goes like this. It starts "Und ich, die in dir geschickt," and it runs until the very end of the aria, saying "Der Jauch und kann sich seines Lebens freuen." So I'll give the translation of the entire thing in English, obviously. "And I that threw the axe, I am there, and finally I see your death. Your nightmares will end, but nor will I have nightmares anymore. And whoever is still alive will triumph and can finally enjoy life." An extremely dramatic scene. It has to be sung with, power, sung with determination. You need to hear how she's screaming those lines in front of the face of her mother. So you need to hear the anger and the determination in her voice, especially for a dramatic soprano, a big voluminous voice, to have like a laser beam like projection just blasting it into the face of her mother, that saying that "I will kill you and everyone will finally be happy." So obviously the vocal coloring, the tone is one thing, but the other is the tessitura of this aria. It's extremely high. The word Yars, triumph, falls on a high C. There are two high Cs in the entire role of Elektra. The first one comes in the opening monologue, and the second one is here. For a high dramatic soprano to sing a high C is pretty much taken for granted, but Elektra is a role that requires vocal stamina like no other high soprano role. So you need to have a spot on high C in order to sing Elektra. If you can't hit this note flatted by an entire semitone, you probably shouldn't be singing this role. And of course, the last note of the aria, freuen, enjoy, also falls on a high note. This time it's a high B flat. And this has to be sung with, it's the last note of the aria. It's the last note that she sings to her mother. The music goes like this. "Und kann sich seines Lebens freuen." So obviously, the freuen has to be sung with, incredible determination, like it's a catharsis. She has to release all the vocal power just for this note. So the way he pronounces this word and blasts the note is very important as well. So Electra's third checkpoint comes in the scene with her presumed dead brother, Orest. The first, note actually that I've chosen for this excerpt that you should listen to is, well, Orest. She, screams almost his name on an A natural, high A natural. after she suddenly recognizes her brother, who was presumed dead. So of course she's in shock. She can't believe it. So that note you have to hear, except for a very powerful high note. You have to hear some amount of shock in the coloring of the note. And then what happens next is she sings a very lyrical, song to her brother. And in that song, she has to sing very softly and very beautifully. Therefore, the other lines from this excerpt I've chosen for the third checkpoint start, let me see. Herrjes unbereitliches, erhabenes Gesicht. And it ends at the end of the song. In English, that's basically uh, superb, inaccessible, sublime face, stay here. Do not disperse in the wind, do not fade away. Even if now, in this moment, I had to die, but you show yourself and take me with you. For here I am dying happier than I have ever lived. So you see, it's a very expressive, lyrics, and it's a very expressive musical a song as well, singing to her brother. There are two notes in this excerpt, except for the entirety of the excerpt here that has to be sung with delicacy, has to be sung softly with a lot of nuance. There are two notes that are very important, which are a high B flat and a high A flat respectively. The first one, the high B flat, falls on the word erhabenes, sublime, and the second one falls on seliger, happier, and I am dying happier than I have ever lived. These two notes have to be sung pianissimo, although it's not written in the score, but it's basically, recognized that it has to be sung very delicately, very softly. So if the Electra doesn't have this pianissimo, which is very common for, a dramatic Wagner soprano doesn't have very good dynamic control, then she probably shouldn't be singing this role either, because it's not just blasting through the role. You don't want that to happen. You want singing with nuance, because half of this role is angry blasting, and the other half is soft lyrical singing. The fourth checkpoint for Electra comes in the end of her scene with Agist. So basically, what happens is Orest goes into the house and kills Agist. He's screaming, "Murder, murder! Does no one hear me?" And then Electra responds, "Agamemnon hears you." So it's obviously another line of intense dramaticism. There has to be like despair, uh, sorrow, all released in one line. Agamemnon hears you. Finally, she has gotten her revenge, but the cost for this revenge is so costly. Her father is dead anyway, so there's still sorrow, but at the same time you have to hear a kind of catharsis in this line. So it's very hard to perfect, and the best interpretation I've heard is all from aged sopranos, because the young ones with a lot of vocal ability just tend to blast it out like any other note they have to do, but that's not what you actually want in this particular line. The last checkpoint for the character of Electra comes in the final scene, the duet with Chrysothermis. The lines I've chosen, and there are two excerpts that I've chosen for this fifth checkpoint, go like this. The first one is Seht ihr das Licht? And it ends with Chrysothermis, high B natural, and thus the start of Electra's dance. What she sings here, Electra, is basically, "Do you see the light that I pour out from myself?" And then Chrysothermis sings a bunch of stuff like, "Who has ever loved us? Who can ever live without love. Love is everything. And then Elektra responds, Ei, Liebe tötet, aber keiner fährt dahin und hat die Liebe nicht gekannt. In English, that's, love kills, but no one has ever lived without knowing love. I mean, what a line. It's probably my favorite line in the entirety of opera. So, very obviously, this line has to be sung with great intensity and emotion because finally she has gotten her revenge for her father, but he's still dead. And after Elektra dances as a ritual to honor her dead father, when she gets her revenge, she dances and she dies basically. So this line, uh, but love kills, but no one has lived without knowing love. It has to be sung with so much dramaticism, and not many people can do that. And the second line from here is uh, starting right after the dance ends and runs until the very end of the opera. It starts Schweig und Tanze and lasts until, the curtain falls. In English, those lyrics translate to shut up and dance. Everyone come here, all come together. I bear the burden of joy, and for you I dance. Whoever, like us, is joyful can only shut up and dance. And then she dances, and then she falls, and then she dies. And then Chrysothermis screams out for arrest, and the opera ends. So the very last note here, not the very last, but one of the notes at the very end of this line, Schweigen und tanzen, again, a high B flat. So shut up and dance. The dance here, the word dance, tanzen, falls on the high B flat, and it immediately drops about 2 octaves down to a very low note on tanzen. So, a very big vocal drop, definitely vocally demanding, but of course, the interpretation cannot be forgotten because it's her, last words. She has accomplished her mission. So just shut up, dance, and I've, fulfilled my duty here on earth, and I can die now in peace and enjoy. How you interpret this line is, different, but you need an Elektra that does not just sing the notes, and you have to hear the, deliberate vocal coloring or vocal acting, if you will, in this line. So, the checkpoints for our second character, Chrysothemis. I've chosen 2 checkpoints for the higher soprano role, and the first one comes in her opening aria, which starts Ich kann nicht sitzen und in soll dunkel starren. The lines here I've chosen from this aria as the checkpoint starts Und aus ihnen selber quillt süßer Drang, and it ends with Elektra's entrance. Basically, what she's singing here in English is and from the bodies of women a sweet juice drips, and they with their breasts nurture life, and babies grow up. No, I am a woman and I want a woman's destiny. I would rather be dead because it's better than living without being alive. This is what she sings. So from this excerpt, she has to sing 2 high B flats and 1 high A. Let's see where they fall. The first high B flat falls on the word groß, und die Kinder werden groß, and the children would grow up. The groß meaning grow up. The second high B flat falls on the word Weiber. Nein, ich bin ein Weib und will ein Weiberschicksal. Meaning I am a woman and I want a woman's life. Weiberschicksal meaning woman's life. So basically, she has to sing this note, this high B flat, with desperation. Actually, the entire thing has to be sung with desperation because she's begging her sister, no, no, take me into this, revenging my father's business. I am a woman and I want a woman's life. And definitely it has to be sung with desperation. She has to, be very desperate vocally in order to convince her sister to let her be and let her live a normal woman's life. And that's basically it. And after she sings this, the Chrysothermis motif plays. It's a very, passionate and desperate musical motif. She has to sob hysterically when this motif plays. So after that passionate musical motif, the tone changes to a angry and, determined one. Uh, Wie lieber tot als lieben und nicht lieben. The high A natural falls on the last word in this, excerpt lieben, which is the last word in English. To be dead is much better than living and not being alive. The word alive falls on the A natural, high A natural, and it has to be sung with, determination, anger, a change of tone completely from, the desperation and, the passion of being a woman from the, previous lines of this excerpt. The second checkpoint for Chrysothermis comes directly after Clytemnestra leaves the scene and she comes in to meet ELEKTRA. But she's singing here in this excerpt a very short one, but a very important one, because it sings Orest. Orest is tot. Obviously, in English, that means Orest is dead, although we know that uh, that is false news. But at that point of the opera, we do not know that yet. So it obviously very emotional, very desperate line of extreme dramaticism. Well, your brother is dead. The one that's supposed to revenge your entire family is now dead. Well, of course, you have to sing it with incredible dramaticism, and the tessitura again is high, so you need to find a balance between, screaming out this phrase and, hitting the right notes. It goes Orest, Orest is tot, and tot, dead, of course, falls on the high A natural. Not a easy note to sing, especially after 13 minutes of loitering backstage. The checkpoints for our third character, Clytemnestra, I've again chosen two. The first one comes at the very end of her only scene, which is with ELEKTRA, of course, as she never leaves the stage. So at the end of that very scene, that the only scene that Clytemnestra appears on stage, she is basically, breaking into a rage because she keeps asking ELEKTRA, what must I sacrifice in order to end my nightmares? And ELEKTRA is answering but not answering, giving very vague answers. And so her mother gets really pissed off, and she just says, after ELEKTRA asks her whether her brother would return home or not, she sings, I don't care who's not at home. In German, this excerpt starts Was kümmert du mich? And it runs until ELEKTRA's entrance of Was bluten muss. So this excerpt in English, I'll read out the lyrics. I don't care who's not at home. I live here. I am the sovereign owner. I have enough servants to guard the doors, and I want, day and night, armed men leave front of the room with eyes wide open. And somehow I will tear the right words, the answers, out of your lips. By now you have betrayed yourself. I know that you know the right victim. You also know the right that would help my nightmares. If you do not speak, you will certainly speak when I lock you up. Uh, if you still don't speak, you will speak when I starve you. My nightmares you will chase away. Whoever suffers from it and cannot find a means to heal themselves is a fool. For me, I will discover what blood will flow so that I can sleep peacefully again. Basically, just a very angry rant at her daughter. The highest note of her entire role also comes at this excerpt, the very last note the very last word of this excerpt. Damit ich wieder schlafe, so that I can sleep again. Schlafe is sleep. That falls on a high A flat, which is the highest note in her entire, role. So obviously the entire thing has to be sung with, dramatic intensity. It has to be sung with a relevant, angry rant-like voice, and you still have to hear the evilness of the character itself, which is, you know, obviously the villain in this story. So you have to hear the nuance in that. The other checkpoint for Clytemnestra, it's up to you whether or not you will consider this a checkpoint, but to me it does matter because it is in the score. Basically, after Elektra sings her aria, Was Bluten Moose, telling her mother that you're going to die, some servants of her mother come and whisper in Clytemnestra's ears, "Oh, Orest is dead," and then um, she laughs hysterically, asks for a Lichter, mehr Lichter, lights and more lights, and then she just laughs like a woman gone mad because presumably she has already gone mad, hearing the news that the guy that is supposed to kill you is now dead. So it's written in the score that she has to laugh hysterically. You can listen to those laughs and her demands of lights, whether or not it's dramatic enough for the character. Um, and then she doesn't have to do anything until the very end when Orest kills her, obviously. In the score, there are written two screams, blood-curdling screams from Clytemnestra, heard from backstage. And these two screams, you can, listen to them as well and determine whether or not it's one that, makes makes you feel that this Clytemnestra would be dramatic enough for the rest of the role. Our fourth character here is the baritone Orest. Uh, I've chosen one checkpoint for this character, and it starts ELEKTRA, ELEKTRA, so si ich sie, and it runs until Elektra's scream of Orest. Basically, what he does in this excerpt is that he's singing, Elektra, did they starve you? Are you okay? Elektra, listen, listen to me, I have no more time. Listen, Orest is alive. One move from you, and it's lost. And then Elektra, of course, asks Orest, what happened? Where's him? He is unarmed as I am, he responds. And then Elektra asks, who are you? I'm afraid. Orest answers, the dogs in the yard recognizes me, and my sister doesn't. And then Elektra sings Orest. That's basically the lines that he sings in this excerpt. Obviously, he has to keep his identity a secret, so it has to be sung, softly with intent of concealing his identity. But at the same time, you have to hear him, trying to break character because in there he says, Elektra, are they starving you? You can hear, you can see that Orest is struggling to conceal his identity. And at the very end, the last line that he sings in this excerpt, of course, has to be sung with, dramatic intent. The dogs in the yard recognize me, and my sister doesn't. So it's up to every listener or every interpreter to determine the psyche of Orest in this role. But it is a very important line, a very important few lines for the entire storyline of the opera. So it has to be sung with dramatic intent, as well as keeping, the role and doing it just as vocally. The very last checkpoint we have here is for the tenor Agith. Now his role is a very, very short one, lasting only 5 minutes approximately. And what he sings here is, I've already mentioned it in Elektra's fourth checkpoint, which is, help, murder, does no one hear me? This is what he sings. But interestingly, the tessitura for this is very high. He has to sing a B natural and a high B flat in succession, uh, in like a minute long excerpt, when he gets killed. So he sings very little, but a big part of that lies very high in the Helden tenor tessitura. So you have to hear the Helden tenor hit the B naturals and B flats with ease. Not many Helden tenors can do that, obviously, and that's why some casting just gets a buffo and or character tenor to do the role, and that's not okay. Some people just skip this entire B natural B flat sequence entirely, like Wolfgang Windgassen, and then some Helden tenors are basically inaudible, gets drowned by the orchestra in this high-lying phrase. And then, of course, you have the buffo tenors who try to do this role, but their voice is too small, and all of that makes this particular excerpt a very rare one that you hear executed perfectly. So, we come to our recordings. The first category is, of course, good and commercially available recordings. And let's start off this section with one of my favorite recordings of this opera. It's from 1957, conducted by Dimitri Mitropoulos with the orchestra and chorus, being the Wiener Philharmoniker and the Wiener Staatsoper Chorus, respectively. This was performed at the Salzburg Festival. Title role ELEKTRA here is sung by Ingeborg. Chrysothemis is Lisa de la Casa, Clytemnestra Jean Madeira. Agist is Max Lorenz, and Orest is sung by Kurt Bohm. The smaller roles here include Alois Pernersdorfer as Orest's tutor, and the maids. Wow, look at that. The first maid is Kirsten Meyer, third maid Sieglin Wagner, fourth maid Marilyn Horn, and the fifth maid Lisa Otto. So it's an all-star cast, but the star here is obviously Mitropoulos. He's recorded ELEKTRA on quite a few occasions. We have this one from Salzburg. We also have one from 1949 from New York with Astrid Varney in a title role. One from 1950 in Florence with Annie Konetzi in the title role, and another one from 1958 featuring Ingeborg again, but with Blanche Thabom and Giorgio Tozzi from New York. I'll talk about this one from 1957 because, in my opinion, this is the best cast in terms of singers that Mitropoulos has conducted ELEKTRA with. Ingeborg is not a singer I particularly adore. I find her voice a bit lacking in core, and it's a bit too breathy for me. It is a big voice, you can't deny that, but it isn't one that comes at you like a laser beam, or it's just too, not concentrated a voice for my liking. But you can't deny that her interpretation of the title role, a very nervous one, is a very great one to listen to. Lisa de la Casa is Chrysothemis here. She's one of my favorites in this role, along with Rizanek and some other ones that I'll introduce later. Rizanek is my absolute favorite, though. Let's talk about de la Casa anyway. Very famous Mozart soprano, but here in Strauss, she does exceptionally well because it's a sort of lyric Hochdramatische role in a sense, and she did those roles very well. It's a very refined, a round, and a bright voice, really, which is perfect for the role. Jean Madeira is Clytemnestra. Now, when we talk about Clytemnestra, there are two categories. One of them are actual mezzo-sopranos who perfect the role. The other category of Clytemnestras are sopranos who are past their prime. I mean, Wagnerian sopranos who used to do ELEKTRA and Brünnhilde and stuff, but they're past their prime now, and just so they sing Clytemnestra. Jean Madeira is from the first category, true mezzos doing the role and doing it amazing. I think that in terms of the first category, Jean Madeira and Regina Resnick are the two Clytemnestras that will never be equaled. And I think this is actually Madeira's best Clytemnestra to have ever been recorded. She's still relatively young here, but she's in incredible form. Kurt Bohm is a bit too, Buffo-based for a serious role like Orest, but as much as I like his Buffo roles, his Orest is still a very good interpretation, just lacking a bit in the, serious, dark solidity, so to say. Max Lorenz is obviously very old here, 1957. That makes him here at the age of 56. But I guess it's a very short role and he does okay. The maids are obviously an all-star cast, and although their roles are very short respectively, the ensemble of maids are very well sung here because of the amount of stars in here. Obviously, Mitropoulos is still the reason that this recording is so great. This opera has, one of the biggest orchestras ever required, written for any piece, and Mitropoulos handles that perfectly. It's conducted with dramatic intensity. It's very loud, but not to the extent where they're just, screaming, the orchestra. No, it's loud, but it's very refined. The texture of the orchestra is very tight-knit, it's very solid, and he manages to put in, some nuance here and there as well. Some, really beautiful moments, such as the recognition scene and ELEKTRA's dance, so on and so forth. In terms of the tempo, he takes it at a bit of a faster pace, but it's, pushing on, it isn't, dragging, and that's what you want from a big Strauss score. At the very end of the opera, the Agamemnon chord, which is da da da, it happens. It occurs in the opera, throughout the opera. It starts with this chord, and it's throughout the opera. At the very end of the opera, it goes from da 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 da, and then Chrysothemis calls out for Orestes to no response, and then that motif goes to major da 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 da, ba-da-bum. Mitropoulos is the only conductor that I've heard sustain the last note before the to such an extent where it creates a final suspense at the end of the opera. So normally other conductors go Orest da da dum da da dum da da dum da da dum dum da da dum. But the last Mitropoulos has the woodwind hold it before the falls, and it's an experience that is so amazing. At the very end of the opera, he just manages to do something so exceptional, and that's the reason I recommend this recording highly. Our second recording here have the same orchestra and chorus, the Vienna Phil and Vienna Staatsoper Chorus respectively, but this time it's from 1964 and the conductor is Herbert van Karajan. ELEKTRA is Astrid Varnay, Chrysothemis, Hildegard Hilbrecht, Clytemnestra Martha Middle, Agist James King, Orest Eberhard Wester, and in the smaller roles, we have Hildegard Rüdgers as the Vertraute. The tutor is sung by Tugomir Frank. The Ausschächerin is Judith Helwig. And the maids include Helen Watts, Lisa Otto, and Lucia Pop here is the fifth maid. Now, this recording, the star is, again, the conductor. Karajan is in top form here. I believe this is one of the best recordings that he has done. Richard Strauss himself, he had said that Karajan was the best conductor that he had heard do ELEKTRA. But Karajan only did it for, I think a few more times after that performance where Strauss himself had heard him do it because of how big the score was. But here is a recording of that, a live one, and it's an it's a document that is very important historically, because Karajan here is in top form. He conducts with a fire that you don't often see or hear in him, so to speak. He doesn't have the gentle, lush woodwind or lush string sounds here. No, it's none of that. It's none of your typical Karajan sound. It's all out. It's dramatic. It's full volume, and it's not like just randomly blasting like Schulte. No, he still has his restraints here, but it's still a very dramatic and very exciting performance. This is probably the most dramatic that Karajan has conducted in his life. The way he does everything from the very start until the very end is one of the best interpretations I've heard. It's even better than the Mitropoulos one, I would dare say. The singers here, Astrid Varnay's Elektra. Now, Varnay, she's another dramatic, Wagnerian soprano that I don't particularly like. Here in 1964, she is in great decline, to be honest. Her top Cs are still there. She still nails them, but her voice has matured a lot since her early years, and throughout her career her voice was a bit too acidic in quality to be singing these roles, because these Wagner soprano roles, Strauss soprano roles, they're heroines, but Varnay's sound is acidic. It's a bit acerbic, so to say, and you can hear that in not only the color of her voice, but also her vibrato. In the late 60s, I mean, only 2 years after she sung this Elektra, she had already started doing mezzo repertoire. Eventually, she would do Clytemnestra, which I adore. I'll talk about that later. But here in the title role of Elektra, she isn't very convincing at all, just because of the tone of her voice. Her technique is excellent. She can blast things, but that acidic quality I can't get past. Hillebrecht here is Chrysothemis, and now Karajan had a tendency to put small voices in, roles that require big voice. This is one of them, but Hillebrecht isn't a particularly small voice. It still had the capability to do some lyric Wagner, not like Elisabetta or Sieglinde, and Chrysothemis is a role that's similar. And she does a decent reading, although it's not a whole lot of vocal acting going on here. It's still very well sung, though. Martha Myrtle is Clytemnestra. Now, Martha Myrtle is a very interesting singer. She started off as a mezzo-soprano, and she recorded a Clytemnestra, the Mitropoulos one at Florence that I talked about earlier, from 1950. She recorded Clytemnestra in her early mezzo-soprano years. Then she became a soprano. She started doing soprano repertory. She never did the title role of Elektra, though. Afterwards, after she no longer had the voice to do, soprano stuff, she reverted back to mezzo. And this is, one of the earliest mezzo roles that she retook. Clytemnestra from 1964 is a really, really good recording of Myrtle's Clytemnestra. I find it, much better than the one from 1950, because in that recording there's not enough vocal maturity there. She doesn't sound like a bitter mother that's preventing her from being killed. No. Here she is excellent, and she did this role for 10 years after this one, but this is still her best Clytemnestra, and I would put her along with Varnay, Ludwig, and Madeira and Resnick. These two I've talked about in the previous recording. I would put these five as the best Clytemnestras to have ever graced the stage, and Myrtle is very, very good. The problem here in this recording, however, is the baritone Orest sung by Eberhard Wester. He is a very thin voice. It's refined for sure. It has its vocal beauty, but it's thin, and it's not deep at all to be doing Wagner baritone roles, or baritone roles in general. I've never been a big fan of his, and his weaknesses here are quite obvious because Karajan is going crazy, and he's blasting the orchestra at full volume, as any conductor should while doing ELEKTRA, and he's completely overpowered. Wester is, with his already weak voice, is inaudible in some points, and it's a very unconvincing reading of the role. Auguste here is James King in his earlier years. It's okay, but Karajan makes a big cut that takes away Auguste's only high notes, so that's a bit of a waste for James King to be in this role. The rest of the cast is also well sung, particularly the fifth maid sung by Lucia Pop in her early years. It is a very lyrical, rendition of a short, minute-long monologue at the start of the opera in the maid scene. So our third recording, again it's Vienna Phil and the Wiener Staatsoper Chorus, but this time it's from 1965, the following year, and the conductor is Karl Bohm. ELEKTRA is Birgit Nilsson, Chrysothemis Leonie Rizanek, Clytemnestra Regina Resnik, Auguste Wolfgang Vengassen, Orest Eberhard Wester. In the smaller roles, we have Margarita Lilova as the first maid and the Schleppträgerin. Danica Mastilovic, who would go on to sing ELEKTRA herself, although very poorly, was the Aufseherin here. And the rest of the maids include Gundula Janowitz as the fourth and Gerda Schreier as the fifth. So again, a star-filled cast, but the Nilsson Resnik trio as ELEKTRA, Chrysothemis, and Clytemnestra respectively are unparalleled. All three of them are the best at their respective roles that has ever been heard. Let's start with Nilsson, shall we? It isn't a big secret that I'm a big Nilsson fan, and especially her ELEKTRA. The earlier ELEKTRA video I made, the proper best moments of ELEKTRA video, contained, well, only Nilsson. And it's no secret that her ELEKTRA is amazing. She is obviously holds the high C's, blasts them, and like a laser beam very well. No problem with the high notes at all, as usual. Her vocal cords are made out of steel, and they're blasting high notes out like a laser beam, and that's what you want in an ELEKTRA. That's what you want. It's excitement, and it's chilling. And for the lyrical moments, a bit too solid in this part of her career, but she still delivers the pianissimi very well in the recognition scene. This, in terms of only vocal quality, she does best in this recording with Karl Böhm from 1965. But in terms of interpretation, that would be the video recording with Levine from 1980, which I will talk about later in our fourth category, I believe. But in terms of just talking about the high notes and the vocality, this is her best ELEKTRA. This was 1965, her first year of doing ELEKTRA. She made her debut with, I think, the Stockholm Opera. That ELEKTRA from 1965 as well is also on record, but the rest of the cast is far from this one. Well, let's move on to the rest of the cast, shall we? Leonie Rizanek, the best Chrysothemis, for one reason. Well, she did record Chrysothemis very early in her career. 1953, there's a recording with Varney in a title role, which I'll talk about later. But there, her vibrato is a bit too, fast, and her voice is still too young, so to speak. Here, in 1965, she's starting to, get on the nervous quality of the voice. She sounds, she sounds tense and nervous in a good way. to portray this character as a virginal but very angsty character, and the tightness, the anxiousness in her voice per se is absolutely perfect for this role. Although her best Chrysothemis is again the one from 80, the video recording, which I'll talk about later. Regina Resnick, again, the best Clytemnestra. I've talked about, how Madeira and Varnai and Middle are on her level, but I think that Resnick is just a bit better because her Clytemnestra is not only vocally perfect, but the interpretation, she takes it to another level. It probably doesn't have the acidity of Varnai, but Resnick's Clytemnestra is very convincing in terms of the vocal acting. She colors every word she sings, and that's not something that you get in every Clytemnestra. Wester here as Orest, same problems. Wolfgang Wingassen is a very vocally inept Agis. As I've already said, he just skips the entire big scene and just doesn't sing, so why? The rest of the cast is good. Mastilovic is singing very well as Alfsecherin. Her Elektra is a mess. Gundula Janovic is the fourth maid, and she delivers some very well sung high notes as well. Schroder, as the fifth, does her early monologue very well. However, the conductor here, Karl Böhm, I have some comments about him. He's a very, very good conductor, no doubt about that. His tempi are fast and pushing, and that's what you want in such a big score. That's not the problem. What I feel is that his conducting is a bit unrefined in terms of the texture of the orchestra. There's not much, glistening moments, or just, there's no wow factor in the midst of the orchestral texture, so to speak. But this is still one of his better recordings of Elektra, not just in terms of the cast, but also his conducting. It's not bad at all, a recording, but there have been better, slightly better conductors of this work. For our third recording in this category, this is from 1988, with Seiji Ozawa conducting the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Elektra is Hildegard Behrens, Chrysothemis, Nadine Segunde, Clytemnestra is Christa Ludwig, Agist is Ragnar Ulfung, and Orest is Jorma Hininen. Now, let's talk about Ozawa first, shall we? He's a conductor that doesn't put a whole lot of dramaticism into his conducting, but he does take apart the score and, pay attention to every detail very much. And it's more of a lyrical interpretation of this opera, I would say, but in the big dramatic moments, he still handles it quite well. And it's a respectable reading of the score for me. Hildegard Behrens is Elektra. Now, she's a soprano that is very special indeed. She has what I'll call it a crude voice. It's unrefined, but in a good way, because you can hear, some, throaty projections, but in a good way, because it's raw, it's powerful, and it just shows how much of, a wild character Elektra is. That is what she is in the story, the opera, and that is what she presents to us. I'm also a fan of her other roles, like Brynhilde Tosca. Probably not the best fit for those roles, but her voice is a very fascinating one, and I love it a lot. Chrysothemis here is Nadine Segunde. I don't think she's a particularly good Chrysothemis, neither is she a particularly good soprano. It's an unrefined voice, but this time not in a good way, because firstly, Chrysothemis needs a lot more, a virginal timbre and a lot more a fresher voice. Secunde isn't that. She flats in quite some places, and it's not a beautiful, it's not a pleasant sound to listen to be honest. That's what you would expect from, Wagner sopranos from the late 80s anyway. Clytemnestra is Christa Ludwig. Now, I've included her in my list of best Clytemnestras, and she totally deserves it. It's more of a nervous interpretation of the role of Clytemnestra. It has a very agitated quality to it, and I think it's you know a different facade to the character of Clytemnestra. She's not just wholly evil, but she's also a bit anxious about her fate and all her nightmares at night. Why can't I sleep and stuff? She's anxious, and Ludwig presents that side perfectly. I mean, it's incredible. She made her last appearance in opera as Clytemnestra. That recording is also available. I'll put the link down below, as well as all the other recordings I mentioned here. But here, under Ozawa, it's a very inspired reading of the role of Clytemnestra, and it deserves, a lot of credit. Agist is Reiner Ulfung. He's a very, very decent tenor. He did serious roles earlier in his career, and later in his career he turned to buffa roles, but he never lost that serious dramatic tenor, hidden tenor vocalism, and he presents it very well here. Hininen, Jorma Hininen as Orest is quite terrible, honestly. Don't even bother. But from 1988, what else can you expect? Our final recording here is from 1990, with Jeffrey Tate on the podium conducting the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande and the chorus of the Grand Théâtre de Genève. ELEKTRA is Gwyneth Jones, Chrysothem is Anne Evans, Clytemnestra Leonie Reznek, Agis is Ronald Hamilton, and the rest is Wolfgang Schön. The conductor is nothing special. Hamilton and Schön as Agis and the rest, respectively, is not good at all. Don't listen to that one. But the three leads are in very, very good vocal form here. Now, let's first talk about Gwyneth Jones. In my opinion, Gwyneth Jones is one of the best Verdian sopranos ever. But her Verdi career ended in the mid-70s, and after that she focused entirely on Wagner Helden soprano roles, which I don't like. But here, her Elektra is an exception. Why? Because for 15 years, since she started taking, big Brünnhilde-like roles, she has completely abased her vocal cords. There are no longer those Verdian lush sounds that she used to produce in the 60s and 70s, early 70s, I mean. But as a result, her vocal cords solidified or steelified, if that makes sense. And by the 80s, late 80s and 90s, all she could do was, yell and scream at, it's still a very powerful voice, but there were no longer any particular nuances that she was able to, deliver. Her middle voice became extremely wobbly. But here, Elektra, this role has a very, very high tessitura. It lies high in the soprano register, which was the only good wobble-free sounds that Jones could produce in that part of her career. So it lies high in her tessitura, therefore reducing her wobble quite significantly. And then, because of the steelified vocal cords of Gwyneth Jones, by the time she reached the 1990s, Elektra was a role that she could still deliver perfectly, because it requires steel. It requires vocal cords of steel. She's pouring it out. She's blasting it with an incredibly powerful voice without getting wobble, without getting, weak and unlistenable sounds lying in the middle voice, because she was no longer able to deliver a listenable Isolde or Sieglinde or Tosca or, let's say, Salome in the 1990s. Elektra is different. It's steel, it's blasting, and she blasts it very well here. So yes, an exception for the late Jones for me, and that's why she makes an appearance on this recording. Anne Evans is a rare, great lyrica Wagner soprano that we have in the 90s. She sings not quite exceptionally, but she sings fairly well here, with nuances, with power, with the held in soprano temperament that we don't have nowadays. Leonie Rizanek as Clytemnestra. This was one of her roles, mezzo roles that she picked up after she had sung her last Chrysothemis in 1986, and she retired in 1996 actually with Clytemnestra. So this is one of her signature roles in the later part of her career, and this is a very good reading of the role here in this recording of Clytemnestra. It's again a nervous, anxious quality, quite like Ludwig's one, but the experience she has had in this opera, she had been singing it since the early 50s, although in a different role, but she knew the score throughout, she knew the psyches of every character, and therefore she makes a very convincing Clytemnestra. On to our second category, good and rare recordings. Our first one here is from 1952, from the Met Opera, conducted by Fritz Reiner. The title role is sung by Astrid Varnay, Chrysothemis is Walburga Wegner. Clytemnestra is Elisabeth Högen, Agist is Seth Svanholm, and Orestes is Paul Scheffler. In the smaller roles, we have Jean Madeira as the Vertraute, Alois Bernstorfer as the tutor of Orest, and we have Lucina Mara and Mildred Miller as the third and fourth maid, respectively. So another very, very impressive cast, honestly. And let's talk about the conductor first. As usual, Fritz Reiner, Richard Strauss' direct protege. You can't debate his interpretations of Strauss because he knew Strauss the best, and his interpretations were closest to what Strauss intended, second only to Strauss himself, of course. And he conducts with a huge lot of dramatic intensity here. Fast tempi, big sounds, exciting sounds, and it's perfect. It's perfect. You can't debate anything that he does. The title role here, Varnay, I've talked about her already, but she's obviously better here in 1952. Her voice was not so mature / acidic. You can still hear hints of that here. I'm still not, fully convinced, but it's a significant improvement from her later Elektras. Walburga Wegner as Chrysothemis. What a soprano, man. Her Salome in the studio with Rudolf Moralt, I believe, was incredible. It is virginal, it is tense, it is anxious, just what Chrysothemis needs. And here, live at the Met, she does the same. It's a terrific reading. Some people might complain about the caprino, the rapid vibrato, but I'm not put off by it because it's a sign of a young voice, a young character, and I could totally accept that. Högen here as Clytemnestra is a bit too light, too soprano-ish for my liking. It's not, dark or deep like a mezzo, and it's just not representative of a mother figure, although vocally she does quite well here. I'm just not convinced by her voice per se. Paul Scheffler as Orestes. What an Orestes. He's probably the best Orestes that we have heard. It's dark, it's deep, it's resonant, but it's round, warm, and it has the nobility of the role that so many baritones or bass baritones lack. It's incredible. It's totally an unparalleled reading of this role. Seth Svanholm past his prime here, but still delivers a decent Auguste. The rest of the cast is, of course, very well sung as well. So this recording, a historical one, and the Orestes scenes here are impeccable. Our second recording from our second category is from 1966, again from the Met, with Thomas Schippers conducting the Nilsson Resnik trio again. James King this time is the agist, and William Dooley is Orestes. Now, Schippers, he's a conductor that is, more dramatically focused in terms of the orchestral texture, a more focused texture than Carl Bohm, with whom the trio did the recording from Vienna the previous year. Here at the Met, the sound quality is a bit poorer, but Schipper conducts more straightforwardly, and the details are still there as Bohm did. James King is an agreeable agist, and William Dooley is a poor Orest. There's not much depth, there's not much darkness. It's an unconvincing reading. Now our third one is from 1971, with Carlos Kleiber conducting the orchestra and chorus of the Württembergisch Staatsoper, and ELEKTRA is Ingrid Steger, Chrysothemis Enriqueta Tarres, Clytemnestra Martha Myrtle, Agist Wolfgang Wingassen, and Orest is William Wilderman. Now, Kleiber. Some people say he's the best conductor ever. I can see where they're coming from, although I'm not 100% convinced. But he's still among the top conductors for me. One of the best to ever grace the stage. And he's made 2 recordings of ELEKTRA. This one from 1971 and another one from 1977, which I will cover a few moments later. Let's talk about this one first. Here, in 1971, he conducts with moderate pace, not a very fast tempi, slower than most conductors do. So he lets the, beauty of the music, the big orchestral sound, he lets the audience, soak in that glorious Straussian orchestral sound. He also, emphasizes a lot of details within the score, within the orchestral texture, so it's a lot more detailed. Adversely, the one from 1977 is more dramatically inspired. The tempi are faster, he's pushing on much more, he's pushing the drama along, and it's more gleaming in terms of the orchestral texture. It's more gleaming on the outside, but not as much details as he does here in 71. Here, the 71 recording we're talking about, he does an impressive and unequaled interpretation of ELEKTRA's dance, which comes at the very end of the opera. It's impressive. It's very impressive conducting, and there are few conductors that can reach the level of mastery of Carlos Kleiber in doing these big orchestral scores. Let's talk about a singer, shall we? Ingrid Steger interprets the title role. On a good day, she could be very, very, very good. One of the most underrated Wagnerian sopranos I know. She reminds me a bit of Birgit Nilsson, actually. Although she does not have, the laser beam blasting quality that Birgit has. But the vocalism of both sopranos are similar. Steger has a more lyric-based voice in terms of, the color. It's more creamy, more marbly, as opposed to Birgit's cold Scandinavian Slavic voice, as so to say. Well, Steger is incredible in this recording. She sings all the notes perfectly. She has a very pathos-based voice, and the interpretation is also very moving, especially in the last scenes. Not as, mother killer like, but it's still a very, moving interpretation of the role. Enriqueta Tarres is Chrysothemis, also a very underrated Wagnerian soprano, evidently a bit more, even more lyric, but it's still a very, flowing and a very beautifully colored and lush voice. Reminds you a bit of Grey Bernstein. Middle is Clytemnestra here. She's obviously matured even more after the Karajan recording. She becomes even, more involved, engaged in the role as compared to the 64 Karajan, and it's a work of art that not many mezzo sopranos can equal. Vingasson Zagis I've talked about, not good. William Wilderman is a respectable Orest, a bit more bassy in quality. It's deep enough, but it's lacking a bit in refinement. It's a bit rough around the edges of the voice. But all things considered, it's a rare recording, but it's very, very worth considering. Our fourth one is from 1976, with the orchestra and chorus of the Kiel Opera, conducted by Klaus Tennstedt. Elektra is again Ingrid Steger, Chrysothemis Johanna Lotte Fecht, Clytemnestra is again Martha Myrtle, Agist is Edward Suter, and Orest is David Cumberland. Now, Steger had a very, very good night where she was in good form. When she was in bad form, there were plenty of bad nights as well, and this was one of them. Obviously, later in her career, she no longer had the ability to control a very lyric and very lush, marbly voice. As such, here in 1976, only 5 years after the Kleiber recording, it's already a bit, out of control. It's wobbly, it's off pitch at times. You can still hear a shadow of what it was in the 71, but it's far from the quality that she achieved in the earlier recording. Johanna Lotte Fecht here is Chrysothemis. It's not a particularly inspiring voice. It's not one that has a wow factor to it. It's still decent though. It's not bad, but it just doesn't, surprise you or make you go like, what a voice. No, it's decent, but that's all. Martha Myrtle even matured more. Doesn't need explaining. I've already talked about that. Edward Suter is, a very thin agist. Too much buffo in there. I don't like that. David Cumberland is an underrated baritone and a very respectable Orest. Not as good as the stars, of course, but it's still a decent reading with enough depth and darkness to the role. Again, the star here is, of course, the conductor. Klaus Tennstedt is a personal favorite of mine. He conducts with dramatic intensity like no other conductor. He has big sounds. He isn't afraid to pour out the entire orchestral sound, and that's what you need in Elektra. The big moments are bigger than any other conductor, and it's not just random blasting at random moments like George Schulte does. No, that's terrible. But here, Tennstedt, at the correct moments of highest dramatic intensity, full volume, coming at you, just blasting it. That is what opera needs, and Tennstedt does that perfectly. So, our final recording in this category is, again, Carlos Kleiber from 1977. I've talked about the background and Kleiber's conducting here already. It's from Covent Garden, with the title role being interpreted by Birgit Nilsson. Chrysothemis is Gwyneth Jones. Clytemnestra Marta Schirmay. Agith is Charles Craig, and Orest is Donald McIntyre. The small role of the tutor of Orest is interpreted by Michael Langdon. Now, Birgit Nilsson. Obviously, she's not as in good shape vocally as she is in the early 60s recordings, but she hits every single high C here, and she still sings with a whole lot of volume. She's drowning out Jones in the entirety of the recording, and for someone at the age of nearly 60, it's an incredible feat, honestly. And apart from the intact vocalism. He gives us much more shades of nuance and details, and the interpretation of a character is there. It's much more obvious than in the 65 recording. It's still not as good as the one under Levine in terms of interpretation. That one also has, the video. We can see her acting. Perhaps that's a reason why she had to act more with her voice than here. But I mean, this recording is still one of her best Elektras. Perhaps it's under the influence of such a great conductor like Kleiber. I don't know, but it's a monumental Elektra. Chrysothemis, Gwyneth Jones. I've talked about her interpretation of the title role, but I'm not a fan of her Chrysothemis. It's too much of a wobble for it to be, a virginal woman, a girl trying to live the life of a normal girl. No, no, no. It's too, it's already too babushka-like after singing a couple of Brunhildes and stuff. So I'm not a fan of her Chrysothemis. However, Marta Girmai's Clytemnestra is very respectable. It's vocally, she does a great job, although not a outstanding mezzo-soprano voice. Her interpretation, the psyche of this role, she does incredibly, perhaps under Kleiber as well. Donald McIntyre as Orestes here. I've never liked him a lot, and his Orestes is way too rough for my liking. Charles Craig is Aegis. He's a great dramatic tenor. His Othello is one of the best, and his Aegis here is sung with full-bodied high notes. It's not a buffo tenor, random character tenor doing it at all. It's a very respectable approach at the very small role, but I like it. Michael Langdon also does his minute-long role of the tutor quite well. So all things considered, except for the slightly poor audio quality, it's an excellent performance of Elektra. So here's our third category, dark horses, recordings that are ignored or overlooked but are in fact great. First one here is from 1947, conducted by Thomas Beecham, with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and the BBC Chorus. Some of you who are more, familiar with the discography of Elektra might say, no, that's not overlooked at all. But I would say it is, because it's difficult to find it on CD on the market. People tend to go for the Schulte or Sinopoli ones and forget about this amazing recording. So I would put it in this category as well. Enough of that talk, let's get into the cast. Elektra is Erna Schlüter, Chrysothemis Luba Velic, Clytemnestra Elizabeth Höngen, Aegist Walter Widop, and Orest is Paul Schöffler. Now, Beecham first, shall we? Very fast tempi here, typical of the 40s and early 50s. It's Beecham being Beecham, but he does push on the drama. It's just a bit too fast for me. For the listener doesn't get to soak in all the musical glory that Strauss gives us. However, the singing here is of very, very good quality. Elektra is Erna Schlüter. Schlüter, what should I say? She reminds us a bit of Rose Pauly, the most acclaimed interpreter of Elektra before her. It's a voice that is very mature, a bit like Ingeborg, but it's not as lyric as Borkh's. It's a mature voice, but it's just a bit too, old lady-like for me. But all things considered, it's still a good voice. I just don't find it, very idiomatic for the role of Elektra. Vocally, it's incredible, though. Luba Velic is Chrysothemis. You should know her as Salome. You should have heard her Salomes. If you haven't, then listen to it. And Chrysothemis is another role that is supposed to be a virginal, young girl quality. Velic gives that 100%. And fulfills the character, the psyche of Chrysothemis perfectly. So yeah, Elizabeth Hengen, I've talked about that. Paul Schiffler, I've talked about that. Walter Widop is not an impressive. I guess he's more of a character tenor for me. But all things considered, Beecham, Wellish, and Scheffler here are, definitely worth getting. Our next recording here is from 1953. Conductor is Richard Kraus with the orchestra and chorus of the Westdeutschen Rundfunks. ELEKTRA is Astrid Varnay, Chrysothemis is Leonie Rezenek, Clytemnestra is Res Fischer, Agis is Helmut Melchert, and Orest is Hans Hotter. Varnay's ELEKTRA is a bit better than the 1952 recording under Reiner, perhaps because it's a radio broadcast. She can bring out more nuances than she can live. So this is her best ELEKTRA, but still not 100% convinced. Maybe I'm just being biased, but it's a good reading, I have to admit that. Rizanek here, a very young Rizanek as Chrysothemis. She has a bit of a caprino here, a fast vibrato. I've said that I don't mind it in Wegener, but I do mind it a little bit in Rizanek because, well, she's just, 27 here. Yes, 27. And her voice doesn't seem fully developed. It doesn't have the nervous quality that we hear later in her career. So comparing this Chrysothemis to her later 100% perfect best interpretation of Chrysothemis Rizanek, you can't compare these two. So it just fades a bit in front of her later interpretations. Orest Fischer is a good Clytemnestra, but I find her timbre a bit too soprano-like. It's a bit too light, not enough depth, not enough, old mother figure, and not enough nervous quality. Vocally, it's acceptable, but not very convincing. Helmut Melchert is Agist. He is excellent at roles like Agist and Herodes from Salome, these kind of Helden Buffo roles, so to say. He's very good at that, and he sings quite well here. Hans Hotter as Orest. Hans Hotter, my favorite Wotan, and one of my favorite bass baritones of all time. He is so great, and Orest is one of the roles that also fit him perfectly. He has the depth, he has the darkness, but he also has the warm quality, the round quality, and the heartbreakingness that we need in a role like Orest, without losing the nobility, of course, and authority. So it's in some way similar to Wotan, and Hans Hotter doing, perfect Wotans for years already. So Orestes is, again, a perfect fit for him. And the recording is incredible because of Hotter. Richard Kraus is also decent conductor with dramatic intent, and all things considered, Hotter makes this recording special and worth a listen. Our third recording is from the same year, 1953. This time it is the orchestra and chorus of the Hessischen Rundfunk. Conductor is Kurt Schroder. ELEKTRA is Ingeborg. Chrysothemis Annelies Cooper. Clytemnestra Margarete Klose. Agis is Henrik Benzing. And Orestes is Ferdinand Franz. We also have a cameo of C.Ludwig here as the first maid. Now, Borkh, I've talked about her ELEKTRA, and she is in much better vocal form here in 53 than she is in the later 57 Mitropoulos recording that I've talked about at the start. It still has, a lot of core in the voice. It's not as breathy as she is later in her career, and the psyche hasn't changed, the interpretation hasn't changed. So if you're a fan of Borkh, definitely get this. If you're not a fan of Borkh, get this, and maybe it will change your perception of her. Or maybe get the 51 Salome under Keelbirth. That one is definitely her best recording, but we're not talking about Salome here today, are we? Anyways, Annelies Cooper, Chrysothemis, not convinced. It's too, again, old lady-like for, Chrysothemis. It's not young enough a voice. Vocally, I think she would be a better fit for the title role than for Chrysothemis. Margaret Kleuser's Clytemnestra. Amazing, amazing. It's not quite on the level of Madeira and Resnick, but it's very, very close. No pun intended. And Mrs. Margaret Close here does very well, vocally and interpretively. It's one of the best early interpretations of the role, shall I say, and it's impressive. It's impressive. You do listen to it. Henrik Benzing is a decent guest. Nothing much to talk about that. But Ferdinand Franz as Orest, what a voice! He's up there with Harter for me. I mean, he's a bit more solid, darker than Harter, a bit less, heartbreaking, gentle, but that's what you want in Orest. You want nobility, you want authority, and Franz does that exactly. It's up there with Scheffler, his interpretation of Orest. Ferdinand Franz and Paul Scheffler, Hans Hotter, some of my favorite Orests, and it's worth getting just because of his interpretation of the baritone role. Now, for our fourth recording, it is conducted by Fernando Previtali from 1957 with the Orchestra of Rai. Very interesting, an Italian Electra, but the cast is in Italian. Inge Borkh is Electra, Hilde Zadek Chrysothemis, Elizabeth Höngen Clytemnestra, Herbert Hand is Agist, and Tomislav Neralic is Orest. Now, Borkh here, similar to the Mitropoulos recording, but Mitropoulos conducts them way better, of course. Hilde Zadek Chrysothemis. Zadek is one of my favorite German sopranos. She sings Chrysothemis incredibly well here. It's not on the level of Rizinek in terms of interpretation, but her voice makes up for it. It's a glorious, shimmering voice, and she does the role justice, definitely. Höngen, a bit more matured here as Clytemnestra. Definitely, more mature than the ones from 47 and 52. So, but still a bit too light for me. This is her best Clytemnestra, though. So, if you're a big fan of Höngen, go for this. Herbert Hunt, character tenor, not a good agist. Tomislav Neralic, very dark and, bassy voice, very voluminous and resonant. A bit too, imposing for Orest, but you get the point. You want the authority, then you give us the authority. Very well sung. I'm impressed. Ugo Trama is the tutor of Orest, and the maids include the likes of Miti Truccato Pace, singing that second maid. So all in all, if not for Previtali's subpar conducting, it's still a considerable Electra, but you can't expect, amazing results putting a second-rate Italian conductor into a recording of one of the biggest operas in terms of size. So that's why it's more overlooked than other ones, but still, in terms of the singing, it's good. It's good. So, our final recording from this overlooked category. Karl Bohm again is the conductor, with the orchestral chorus of L'Opéra National de Paris. Electra is Birgit Nilsson, Chrysothemis Leonie Rizanek, Clytemnestra Astrid Varnay, Agist is Richard Lewis, and Orest is Hansa Sotin. Nilsson and Rizanek are in great form here. Not as great as the Metropolitan broadcast from 5 years later, but it's still very, very respectable readings of the score. They're challenging their personal bests, I would say. Astrid Varnay is an incredible Clytemnestra. I would even put it above Myrtle's interpretation. Of course, the acidic quality that I've mentioned so many times finally is in correct use. Her Clytemnestra is evil, and rightly so. She does, demonstrate the nervous quality, of the psyche, but you can hear that she is, unrestricted here. She's going all out, and what a Clytemnestra she is. An even better interpretation is again under Bohm, but it's from the film version from 1981. I'll talk about that later. You can see her acting there. It definitely gives that recording the upper hand, but she's still in very good form here. Richard Lewis, he's a decent Halton tenor, but here, partly because of the audio quality, he's drowned out by Bohm's orchestra, and so not really worth considering because of him. Hans Sotin is Orest. He's a bit lacking in terms of, depth for me, but it's a very round, marbly, warm, very convincing Orestes. Just a bit too, baritonal for me, so to say. Bohm is still in very good form here in 75. He would continue to conduct ELEKTRA for, a few more years before his death. His last recording, the film I've talked about, is not as good though. But he is still very good form here, so go for it if you love Varnai or you just want to collect all of Birgit's ELEKTRAs. So, our fourth category, film or video recordings of ELEKTRA. Firstly, we have one version from 1968 conducted by Leopold Ludwig with the State Orchestra and Chorus of Hamburg. ELEKTRA is sung by Gladys Kushta, Chrysothemis Ingrid Björner, Clytemnestra Regina Resnick, Agist Helmut Melchert, Orest is Hans Sotin, and Ursula Böse makes a cameo as the third maid. Now, Gladys Kushta, an agreeable ELEKTRA. It's okay, but a bit on the older sounding side for me. I would want a younger, vengeful girl voice for ELEKTRA. Something with more clarity, like Birgit Nilsson's voice. She flats the two high Cs. It's forgivable. They're difficult to sing, of course. It's okay, but it's not the most impressive reading of ELEKTRA. Ingrid Björner's Chrysothemis, her emission is a bit faulty. It's on the smaller side in terms of the voice, but she wants to sound bigger, so she screams, and there's a bit of a throaty emission in there. Not a big fan of hers, but we can finally see the amazing acting of Regina Resnick as Clytemnestra. We have, a lot of audio recordings of her best role and the best Clytemnestra, but we finally have a video recording, and so you can look at how she interprets it in terms of the psyche. Melchert's Agist and Hans Sotin's Orest I've already talked about. Leopold Ludwig is a decent conductor, but it's not, that impressive or that special a reading of the score. It's agreeable though, and it's a decent recording of ELEKTRA, I would say. Now, the long-anticipated 1980 Metropolitan Telecast ELEKTRA featuring Birgit Nilsson and Leonie Rezanek. James Levine is the conductor here, Mignon Dunn sings Clytemnestra, Donald McIntyre is Orest, and Agist is sung by Robert Nagy. Now, Birgit Nilsson's form here in this performance. She flats the two high Cs. I don't care. In the recognition scene, she floats the most otherworldly pianissimi I've heard from her on the B flat and A flat that I've talked about earlier in the checkpoint session. Wow, it's incredible. By this point of her career, she had lost a bit of the cold Turandot princess killer voice, and she has developed more of a marble, warmer, sort of a creamier quality in her voice. And there are so much more nuances now that the steel, icy vocal cords have gone. She manages to produce some very, very glorious sounds, and especially in the finale, you can hear the desperation and ultimate catharsis of Elektra as she, reaches her death. The interpretation of and the vocal acting of the role of Elektra has never ever even come close to being equaled in this Metropolitan telecast of Elektra. It is truly something out of this world. This is, within my top 5 recordings of any opera ever. It's that good. Nilsson is, well, I'm biased, of course, but this is amazing. This is something that you should definitely watch in your lifetime, at least once. And I've watched it about 1,000 times now. It is so good. Leonie Riesenig is absolutely terrific here. This is her best Chrysothemis. She had a really high fever on that night of the telecast, but she pushed through knowing that it was going to be recorded on video. Here, she has a nervous quality that has never been equaled in her previous performances. Perhaps it's because of her fever, perhaps for other reasons. It's so nervous, it's so bone-chilling, but at the same time, it's such a catharsis when you hear her, tense voice here. It's something that has never been equal. I can't describe it with words precisely how she sounds here, so you have to listen to it yourself. Mignon Dunn as Clytemnestra, a bit too small or too light a voice, but her vocal acting makes up for that. It's not a malignant intent, but definitely you can hear the evil intent in in her interpretation of the role. McIntyre, I've talked about him, not great. Robert Nagy is okay as Agist, while James Levine is also decent, not something special. On the podium, some critics have said that he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. That's bullshit. The finale and Elektra's dance is conducted with precision and with detail, just not, something that you get shimmering or some Karajan quality conducting. No, he's James Levine. What do you expect? The next one is from the following year, 1981, with Carl Bohm leading the Wiener Philharmoniker and the chorus of the Wiener Staatsoper. Leonie Riesenig sings his only Elektra. Katharina Ligenza is Chrysothemis. Astrid Varnay is Clytemnestra. Hans Bayer is Agist, and Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau is Orest. The cameos here include Kurt Böhme as the old servant and Joseph Greindl as Orest's tutor. Now, Karl Böhm, this is not a good recording for him. This was recorded immediately before his death. Once he finished the recording of this Elektra, he died. Therefore, he is not in good form at all. He drags, it's sludgy, there is no texture at all. Elektra's dance and the finale is conducted at a ugly pace. It's not good at all. But you can forgive him because he's literally on his deathbed and he still pushes through and finishes this recording. Hats off to him, but no, just no, not a good recording. For him at least. Leonie Riesenig has never done the title role on stage, but she did sing it here. For me, it has, the nervous quality of her other, Clytemnestras and Chrysothemises, but as the title role, it's just lacking in a bit of fierceness, cruelness, and determination. Katharina Ligenza is not in good form here either. She was excellent in Isolde and other, lyric Wagner roles in the early 70s. Here, she's not good at all. No, but Varnay's Clytemnestra here, you can see her acting. You don't even need to see the video to hear her acting. Incredible, absolutely incredible. the laughter and demands for more lights at the end of her scene. No Clytemnestra has ever been able to equal that evil laughter and that dramatic intensity. It's incredible. It's incredible. Hans Bayer is a decent Nagist, although he's old here and he flats the top notes, but he was a great Helden tenor, and he still is on this recording. Fischer Dieskau as Orest. Why? He was never good at any form of opera. No, I've already talked about him in the Tosca video. His Orest is no better than his Scarpia or any other operatic roles, to be honest. If you're a fan of his leader, don't listen to his opera. It'll just ruin his image in your hearts that he was a perfect leader singer and he could probably do well in opera as well. No. He has like the timbre of a tenor, therefore he screams, he yells. It's a small voice, it's screamy. No, it's so rough, and no, it's ugly. You don't want to listen to that. Joseph Greindl and Kurt Böhme, at very old ages, delivered their line very well, but it's just like a few seconds for each of them. It's a cameo, of course. It doesn't make up for the rest of the subpar cast, including Ligenza and Dieskau, but just for the sake of it, it's a good production. It has good filmography. The sets are brilliant, and it's a very good film in terms of visually. The singing is not that good, and the conducting is not that good either. But what are you asking for? Our fourth video recording is a live one at the Orange Festival, conducted by Marek Janowski with the orchestra and chorus of Radio France. Gwyneth Jones interprets the title role, Leonie Rizanek is Clytemnestra, and James King is a Geist. I've already elaborated on these three. Our newcomers are Elizabeth Connell as Chrysothemis and Simon Estes as Orest. Now, Connell is a mezzo turned soprano, and she does brilliant in the soprano repertoire here as Chrysothemis. You don't really anticipate much from a mezzo turned soprano usually, but here she sings with lyricism. She hits the high notes, and although it's a bit muddy when we talk about her voice, it's still sung with detail and nuance. So she's a decent Chrysothemis. Simon Estes as Orest is another very good interpretation of this role. I always find his singing in opera a bit too cardboard, but you can't deny that his voice is one of the most brilliant, most powerful and resonant of the 80s and 90s. Apart from the lack of vocal acting, Estes is a brilliant Orest, and Gwyneth Jones and Rizanek are in very good form here as well. You can see their acting, and the audio quality is a bit poor. The quality of singing, however, makes up for that. Marek Janowski doesn't do a whole lot on the podium, but it's still agreeable, his interpretation of the score. The last video recording is from 1995, from the Teatro Colón. ELEKTRA is Hildegard Behrens, Clytemnestra is Leonie Rizanek, Chrysothemis is Deborah Voigt, Agis and Orest are Ronald Hamilton and Alfred Muff, respectively. Now, Behrens as ELEKTRA, I've talked about that on the Ozawa set. She is still in very good form here, despite being almost 60. Rizanek, again, a brilliant Clytemnestra, and she is in no poorer form here than her earlier Clytemnestras. It's an amazing interpretation of the role, and you can see that in terms of the video as well. Deborah Voigt, very controversial figure. I would say that her, in the early to mid 90s, she was barely listenable. After that, she is just absolutely terrible. So in this case, from this recording, She is, of listenable quality. She isn't that bad. Although some might say that she is like terrible. I agree, but in the 90s, I don't think she was 100% terrible. Maybe 90%, but that 10% came in this recording, and it's barely listenable. Uh, but what are you asking for in the 90s? I mean, yeah, Agis and Orest, though, terrible. No. Klobucar, excellent conductor, excellent reading of the score, a bit lacking in volume at times, and a bit rushing at times as well, but it's okay, it's respectable. The stars here are still Behrens and Rizanek, and for a recording as late as 1995, you don't really get, good opera recordings after the 80s usually. So 15 years after the turn of the decade into the 80s, and you still get Behrens and Rizanek delivering one of the best interpretations of their roles respectively. That's rare, and this recording is quite good as well. Oh, now we come to recordings to avoid. These are quite controversial, I would say, but I'll give them to you anyway. First one is Carl Bohm's 1960 studio recording with the Dresdner Staatskapelle. Ingeborg is ELEKTRA, Marian Schesch is Christothemis, Jean Madeira is Clytemnestra, Agis is Fritz Uhl, Orestes is Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. Now, Fischer-Dieskau is not any better here than he was 20 years later. No, terrible. Bye. Ingeborg as ELEKTRA. By 1960, her breathiness was already starting to get unbearable, for me at least. So, I mean, she was still a great ELEKTRA in this recording, but I just can't put up with the lack of core in her sound. Marian Schesch as Chrysothemis. If she had recorded it 10 years earlier, it would have been perfect. By 1960, she was already sounded like an old lady. That's a no for me. Jean Madeira and Fritz Uhl are still very good. They're probably the redeeming qualities of this recording, but it just doesn't make up for the other components of this opera recording. Carl Bohm is okay here. It's not his best ELEKTRA. He never does particularly well in studio, and this was not one of his best ELEKTRAs. All things considered, I wouldn't say avoid it by any means, but it's not a recording that I would recommend by any means as well. The next recording is from 1967. George Schulte conducts the Wiener Philharmoniker with Birgit Nilsson, Marie Collier, Regina Resnick, Gerhard Stolz, and Tom Krause as the five leads. Now, why would you criticize a recording with Nilsson and Resnick? Haven't you said that these two were the best in their respective roles? Yes, but neither of them recorded well in studio at all. Marie Collier as Chrysothemis is too small a voice and throaty projection at times. I don't like it at all. Gerhard Stolze, way too buffo character stuff for Agist, way too light a voice. Tom Krause as Orest is lacking, depth and darkness. And Schulte, terrible as always, just putting the dramatic emphasis in all the wrong places, letting the brass play as loud as they want to in places that don't even need the loud playing by brass section. So completely imbalanced, not good at all. Don't get it. It's probably the most famous recording of ELEKTRA, but it's also among one of the most underwhelming. So, our third recording to avoid is from 1989, conducted by Claudio Abbado with Vienna Phil and the Wiener Staatsoper Chorus. Title role is sung by Eva Martin. Christothemis is Charles Studer. Brigitte Fassbinder is Clytemnestra, James King is Agis, and Orest is Franz Grunheber. James King is probably the only redeeming quality of this recording. The rest is not good. Eva Martin has way too little core and way too much of a wobble for ELEKTRA. That means that any vocal acting or interpretation she puts into the role is completely overshadowed by her vocal inability. Cheryl Studa is way too light a voice for Chrysothemis. She gets drowned by the orchestra at times. Brigitte Fassbinder, an undeveloped soprano, shouldn't be doing any mezzo stuff at all. Her leader are good, but her opera recordings are unagreeable, to say the least. She doesn't do any better at Clytemnestra here. Franz Grünheber, not a bad voice, but a throaty one. Cardboard interpretations, no vocal acting. A rough in terms of interpretation and the voice per se. Not a good Orest. Claudio Abbado, lacking in volume at times, and the dramatic intensity just leaves people hanging. You want big sounds from ELEKTRA, and he doesn't do that here. At the end of this recording, you can even hear the Viennese public booing him because he's leaving Vienna Phil to another orchestra, which I forgot. They do that all the time, but for me, I would rather boo the performance than Abbado leaving, because Abbado doesn't do quite well here either. A fourth recording that I would recommend not to get is conducted by Wolfgang Sawalisch with the orchestra and chorus of the Bayerischen Rundfunks. ELEKTRA is Eva Martin and Chrysothemis is Cheryl Studer again. Clytemnestra this time is Mariana Lipovcek. Agis is Hermann Winkler. And Orest is Bernd Weichel. Now I've talked about Martin and Studer. They don't fare any better in studio. Lipovcek is a bit underwhelming as Clytemnestra. She has a good voice, but she doesn't make very good use of it, although she has two extremely blood-curdling screams in her Murder, which I like a lot. But that isn't part of the singing, so it doesn't count. Hermann Winkler and Bernd Weichel are both too light, way too light for their roles, respectively, and they shout, and they're throaty and not good. Never been a fan of Sawalisch. Not very dramatic conducting, and the edges are a bit weird for me. They don't, present the volume where it's needed, and the orchestral texture per se is a bit sticky, a bit gluey for me, and I don't like that. Our final recording to avoid is from 1995, with Daniel Barenboim conducting the Berliner Staatskapelle. ELEKTRA is Deborah Pulaski, Chrysothemis Alessandra Mark, and Clytemnestra is Waltraud Meyer. Agis is Johann Botha, and Orest is Falk Strukman. Now, Pulaski, same problem as Martin. Very coreless voice, and there's the wobble there as well. Not a good ELEKTRA at all. Waltraud Meyer, never liked her in mezzo repertoire because she sounds too light, and when she does her soprano repertoire, it's too wobbly and screamy. So she was never a good singer in any repertoire. However, Chrysothemis here is Alessandra Mark, and I think she does a decent job here. She did, 1 year later, 1996, interpret the title role of ELEKTRA under the recording with Giuseppe Sinopoli. I'll link that as well. Sinopoli conducts amazingly in that performance, but Mark is just not as good as she is in Chrysothemis when we compare it to the interpretation of the title role of ELEKTRA in the Sinopoli set. And the rest of the cast there isn't that good either. Back to the Barenboim recording, Johann Botha showed potential early on, but he never used the voice correctly. Here as well, as Agis is not convincing at all. Falk Strukman is surprisingly listenable for a 1995 performance, but it's lacking in depth and low notes. it's a bit weak on the low side. And Baden-Bohm isn't conducting particularly well either. So, no. You can consider the Sinopoli one though, just for, the conducting. Now we come to excerpts, a recording of arias or excerpts and scenes of the opera Elektra. The first one we have here is Kirsten Flagstad singing Orest from the recognition scene in a concert from 1952. Now, by the time Flagstad came to 1952, the year she recorded her incredible Isolde commercial recording, she had already had the marble tone voice since her debut, but by the time 1952 came by, she had gained another asset to her voice, which was clarity, and she delivers an incredible Orest song here, the song to her brother, as I've mentioned earlier in the checkpoints. The top notes, the high B flat and A flat, are sung pianissimo. The entire scene as a whole is extremely lyrical and it is very beautiful. It is on par with Nilsson's interpretation in the Met telecast. And of course, she is one of the greatest voices ever. I can understand why she never attempted the whole role. It would probably wreck her voice. She couldn't handle such a high tessitura. But in this particular excerpt, she shows that the lyrical side of Elektra should be done accordingly. The second recording we have here are actually a few minutes of excerpts that survived from the Met premiere of Elektra. It has Gertrude Kappel as Elektra, Goethe Ljungberg as Chrysothemis, and Karen Brenzel as Clytemnestra, conducted by Artur Bodansky. Obviously, the historical importance is there. It's the Met premiere of this amazing opera after all. Even though only 6 minutes of it has survived, it is of incredible historical significance. Our third inclusion is technically not excerpts because the full opera does exist. It is Rose Pauly under Artur Rodzinski at Carnegie Hall from 1937. Why I put this in excerpts is because I have yet to come across the recording of the entire opera. It does exist, but I just haven't bothered to, buy it because I'm broke. Anyway, what I have on my hands is the full recognition scene and the monologue plus her aria Was bluten muss. You can hear from these three excerpts why she was the definitive Elektra before the big names came in. It is a tone similar to that of Erna Schlüter, which I have talked about, but with more refinement, with more vocal coloring, and it is incredible. It's the old school technique, completely old school, brought into the late 30s, and you can hear that this is what Richard Strauss would have heard during his lifetime when he composed Elektra, what he would have had in his mind interpreting the title role. The fourth one we have here is a full recording of the entire scene with Orest. It has C.Ludwig in the title role and Walter Berry as Orestes. It's from a 1964 studio recital conducted by Heinrich Hohlreiser. Now we've talked about Ludwig's Clytemnestra. It is excellent. She also did this, segment of the title role very well. She delivers the song to his brother with incredible warmth and pathos. Walter Berry, of course, is another great baritone. He did Wotan to great acclaim, and that's why he also gives here a very refined, rounded, and marbly toned Orest. All in all, it's a very, very good recording, and it gives you a side of, C.Ludwig's interpretation of the opera as a whole without being only in the evil character. Our last one here is another recording of the full scene with Orestes. It has Fritz Reiner on the podium conducting Ingeborg and Paul Scheffler. Now we've talked about all three of these artists, so I won't go into detail. However, Reiner is excellent in this studio recital conducting, and both Borkh and Scheffler are in relatively good voice, although I'm still not convinced by Borkh in this recording. Schloffer is a bit older here when compared to his early ones that I've mentioned earlier, but he is still in very, very good voice, and there is more nuance than before. So I would say that this is also a recording of the Orest scene that is worth considering. So that's it for the video. My next video of the series will be on the recordings of Aida, so stay tuned for that. For now, peace out.